50 men and women. Combined net worth, over $40 billion. They ran Fortune 500 companies. They were on magazine covers. They had drivers, jets, vacation homes on 3 continents. And I sat across from every single one of them and asked them one question. What do you regret? Not one of them said they wished they had worked more. Not one. My name doesn't matter. What matters is why I did this. 3 years ago, I was 34 years old, pulling 70-hour weeks at a consulting firm, missing my daughter's first steps because I was on a call with a client in Singapore. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself I was building something. That one day when I had made it, really made it, I would slow down. I think most of us tell ourselves that. Then my mentor, a man who had built 2 companies from nothing and sold one of them for $600 million, sat across from me at dinner one night. He looked tired in a way I had never seen before. And he said very quietly, I would give back every dollar to have 5 more years with my wife. She had passed 6 months earlier. Alzheimer's. He had been at the office for most of it. That sentence changed something in me. I needed to know if he was the exception. So I spent the next 18 months traveling across the country, to retirement communities in Florida, to quiet farmhouses in Vermont, to expensive apartments in Manhattan and modest bungalows in Arizona. I sat with 50 retired CEOs, chairmen, founders, and executives. I recorded every conversation with their permission. And then, always at the end, I asked about regret. What I heard, I was not prepared for. The first person I visited was a man I'll call Richard, 81 years old, former CEO of a regional bank chain. He met me at the door in a cardigan. The house was beautiful. The house was also very, very quiet. His kids lived in Seattle and London. He spoke to them maybe once a week. I asked him about his proudest achievement. He said expanding into Michigan in 1987 when everyone told him he was crazy. I asked him about his regret. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, my son played baseball in high school. He was good, not great, but he loved it. Maybe for games in 4 years. I was always traveling. I told myself he understood. He looked at the window. He understood. That was the problem. He stopped expecting me to show up. By the time he was 17, he stopped even telling me when the games were. I wrote that down, and I kept thinking about it for the rest of the trip. 2 weeks later, I was in Connecticut visiting a woman I'll call Margaret, 74 years old, former CEO of a pharmaceutical company. Sharp, elegant, quick to laugh. She poured us both coffee and jumped right in before I even asked. You want to know what I regret? Everyone does when they find out I spent 40 years in corporate America. I smiled and waited. I regret the version of myself I killed. Before the executive track, she had been a painter. Not a hobby painter, a serious one. She had shown work in galleries in Boston in her late 20s. But a mentor told her she would have to choose. He said art and ambition don't share a bed. So I chose ambition. I told myself I'd come back to painting when I retired. She paused. I retired at 68. I sat down in front of a canvas, picked up a brush. Nothing came. That part of me had died, and I had killed it, willingly. In Nashville, I met a man I'll call Donald, 77 years old. He had run a logistics empire, 15,000 employees at its peak. He lived alone now. His wife had left him 30 years ago. He didn't talk about business much. What he wanted to talk about was his ex-wife, Carol. She was patient for 15 years. 15 years. That is a long time for a person to wait for you to show up. He said she had left a note on the kitchen table. 3 sentences. I love you, but I can't love you enough for both of us. Goodbye. He had read that note 1,000 times, he said. He kept it in a drawer by the bed. I built a company that moved $6 billion of goods a year. I couldn't move 30 miles to be home for dinner. Founder of a tech company acquired for just under $1 billion. She was funny, irreverent, self-aware. I stopped having real opinions around 42. You want to know why? I waited. Because I learned that having real opinions is expensive when you're building a company. Investors don't like surprises. Boards don't like unpredictability. So you sand yourself down, little by little, until one day you wake up and you're 64 and you have no idea what you actually think about anything that matters. She laughed a little, but her eyes didn't. In Phoenix, I met Thomas, 83 years old. He had run a construction company that shaped the skyline of 3 American cities. He was proud of that. He told me which buildings were his. He pointed to photos on the wall. Then he got quiet. I had a friend, best friend since we were 8 years old. We built a treehouse together. Can you believe that? 8 years old. His friend, he called him Joey, had died at 61. Heart attack. I was in Dubai when he died. I didn't make it to the funeral. I sent flowers. Flowers. He shook his head slowly. I had seen him maybe twice in the last decade. We kept saying we would take a fishing trip. Always next summer. Next summer. He leaned forward and looked at me very directly. Next summer never comes for everyone. You learn that too late. By the time I reached my 20th interview, a pattern had emerged. Not just the content of the regrets, but the way they were delivered. These were people who had given speeches to thousands, who had announced billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking. But when they talked about what they regretted, they spoke slowly, carefully, like the words were fragile. Like they had been turning them over in their hands for years, and they still weren't sure how to hold them. In Boston, I met a man I'll call Gerald, 78, former chairman of a private equity firm, the kind of man who had made and broken careers with a single phone call. He met me in a corner booth of an expensive restaurant. Old habit, he said. He always liked to see the whole room. His regret was specific, particular, devastating. His daughter had suffered from depression through her 20s. She called me one night. I'll never forget it. She was crying. She needed me. And I was in the middle of a deal. $50 million on the line. I told her I'd call her back in an hour. He looked at his coffee cup. It was 3 hours. His daughter had checked herself into a hospital that night. She recovered. She was fine now. Married. 3 kids. She forgave me. She said she forgave me years ago. He set his cup down. I haven't forgiven myself. In Austin, I sat with a woman I'll call Linda, 71. She had run a media company, larger than life in every room she entered. She told me she had been married 3 times. Not with embarrassment, just as a fact. Each time I married someone who understood my ambition, respected it, and each time I proved to them, and to myself, that ambition always came first. I asked if she wished she had chosen differently. She said something that stopped me cold. I don't regret the divorces. I regret that I never let any of them really know me. I kept the most important parts of myself locked away because I thought vulnerability was a liability. In business, in love, in everything. I performed intimacy. I never practiced it. At 71, I have no idea how to let someone in. That is a prison I built myself, brick by brick, corner office by corner office. A retired tech founder I'll call David, 67. Sold his second company at 58. Could buy anything he wanted. You know what money can't buy? The version of your kid who still thinks you are a hero. He explained. His son had idolized him. Completely. The way small children do before they see the cracks. Somewhere around 12 or 13, he figured out that his dad wasn't as present as he pretended to be. Wasn't as invincible. Wasn't the version I had sold him. And I watched the light go out. The way he looked at me changed. He became polite, respectful, distant. Polite is what you are to strangers. My son became polite with me, and I have never fully gotten him back. There was a retired oil executive I'll call Frank, 80. He flew me out to see him on his ranch in Wyoming. He took me on a walk across the land, miles of it, beautiful and completely empty. I bought this place 20 years ago, dreamed about it for 30 years before that. 2,000 acres, my own land as far as I can see. I told him it was extraordinary. He nodded. My wife died before we could move here. My kids grew up in the city. They don't like the quiet. He stopped walking and looked across the land. I come out here every morning. I sit on the porch. 2,000 acres and not one person who would notice if I didn't get up tomorrow. He said it without asking for sympathy, just as a man would state a weather observation. And that made it worse somehow. Of all 50 conversations, there is one I will carry with me until I die. His name, and I am using his real first name because he asked me to, was Walter, 86 years old. A retired hospital system CEO who had managed over 40 hospitals across the American South. He was one of the last people I interviewed. His daughter sat nearby reading a book while we talked. He moved slowly. His hands trembled slightly, but his mind was perfectly, painfully clear. He started not with his career, but with a single memory. There is a photograph, black and white. My daughter, she was maybe 4 years old in it, and she is holding my hand at the beach. You can tell from the way she is holding it that she doesn't think anything bad can ever happen to her, because her dad is there. He stopped. I look at that photograph and I think about the man in it. What did he do with that trust? What did he do with that little girl who thought her father was the safest place in the world? His voice dropped. He went back to work on Monday. Walter told me that he had been, by every measurable standard, a successful father. His daughter was a doctor, well-adjusted. They had a good relationship. He was quick to say that. She turned out wonderfully, in spite of me, or maybe around me, the way flowers grow around stones. He told me about the night of her high school graduation. He He had come straight from the airport. A board meeting in Chicago had run over. He made it. He was there when she walked across the stage. I remember thinking, I made it. I was there for the moment that counts. He paused. But here is what I did not know. Years later, she was in her 30s, we were talking one night, and she told me something. She said that what she remembered from that graduation night was not the ceremony. She remembered that afterward at dinner, I was on my phone for 45 minutes dealing with a hospital crisis. And she remembered thinking, he was there, but he wasn't really there. Walter was quiet for a long time. His daughter looked up from her book across the room. Their eyes met. And something passed between them that I couldn't name, something tender and complicated and alive. She gave him a small smile. He looked back at me. She knows I love her. She has always known. But she also knows that for most of her childhood, the company came first. And you can love someone with your whole heart and still make them feel like they come second. That is the thing they don't tell you. He leaned forward then. I managed 42 hospitals. I oversaw the care of millions of patients. I saved lives, indirectly, through decisions I made. That mattered. That genuinely mattered. But none of those patients needed me specifically. There were other administrators, other CEOs, other people who could have done my job. There was only one person who needed me to be her father. And there was only one window of time when that was possible. I spent that window mostly at work. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. As I was leaving, he said one more thing, quietly, almost to himself. The saddest word I know is irretrievable. 18 months, 50 conversations, thousands of miles. I came home with notebooks full of regrets. And I kept waiting for the outlier, the one CEO who would say, yes, I wish I had pushed harder, worked longer, sacrificed more. I never found that person. What I found instead was a thread, thin but unbreakable, that ran through every single story. Every one of these people had confused achievement with meaning. They had built things that lasted. Companies, legacies, industries. And almost none of them felt it had been worth the price they paid in the currency that can't be earned back. The presence, the ordinary, irreplaceable moments. Margaret, the former painter, said something near the end of our conversation that I keep returning to. Success is a very good anesthetic. It numbs the questions you should be asking, and by the time it wears off, the window is closed. Charles said, I optimized my career like a machine. I never asked the machine what it was built for. And Walter's words kept echoing every time I tried to sleep. There was only one window of time when that was possible. None of these people were monsters. They were not selfish villains. They were people who worked hard because they believed in what they were building, because they had been taught, by culture, by business school, by admiring mentors, that sacrifice was the price of greatness. And they paid that price, every day, for decades, without fully understanding that the currency they were spending was not renewable. That is the cruelty of it. Not that they were bad people, but that they were good people who accepted bad trade-offs without ever stopping to question them. The question none of them had asked, until it was too late, was simple. What am I actually building this for? Not the company, not the answer they would give to shareholders or the board. The real answer, the one that lives beneath the ambition. Most of them, when they finally sat still long enough to ask it, found that the answer had almost nothing to do with their career. It was a person, or a few people, or a feeling, or a simple, quiet life they had told themselves they would get to eventually. I got home from my last interview and I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. I could hear my daughter inside the house, laughing at something. I don't know what. I thought about Richard's son, who stopped telling his father when the games were. I thought about Walter's photograph, the little girl at the beach. I thought about the window. And I thought about all the calls I had taken during dinners, all the late nights I had called necessary, all the versions of "not right now, in a little while" that I had handed out like loose change. The window is not closing in theory. It is closing right now, today, while you are watching this. In Nashville, I met a man I'll call Donald, 77 years old. He had run a logistics empire, 15,000 employees at its peak. He lived alone now. His wife had left him 30 years ago. He didn't talk about business much. What he wanted to talk about was his ex-wife, Carol. She was patient for 15 years. 15 years. That is a long time for a person to wait for you to show up. He said she had left a note on the kitchen table. 3 sentences. "I love you, but I can't love you enough for both of us. Goodbye." He had read that note 1,000 times, he said. He kept it in a drawer by the bed. I built a company that moved $6 billion of goods a year. I couldn't move 30 miles to be home for dinner. None of the 50 people I interviewed said they should have worked more. But here is the question I want to leave you with, the one that kept me up for weeks after I finished the project. If someone asked you, 40 years from now, what you regret, what would you say? And more importantly, is there anything you can do today to change that answer?